What if the delicate princess you've read about in fairy tales and history books wasn't quite what she seemed? What if, beneath the silken gowns and the demure smiles captured in faded portraits, there lay a secret so explosive that it could have toppled thrones, shattered alliances, and rewritten the bloodlines of Europe? Imagine a child born to royalty, raised as a daughter to preserve a fragile crown, but in truth, a son, a prince hidden in plain sight. Tonight we delve into one of the most guarded whispers of the past, the princess who was actually a prince. Shocking royal secret. If these shadowed tales of Europe's noble houses intrigue you, subscribe to the History One channel for more revelations from the hidden corners of history. Hit that bell icon and join us as we uncover the next forbidden story. In the glittering yet treacherous courts of 18th century Europe, where every glance could conceal a dagger and every alliance hinged on the purity of bloodlines, secrets were currency, and none were more valuable or dangerous than those involving succession. In one small but ambitious German principality, nestled amid the patchwork of states that made up the Holy Roman Empire, a crisis unfolded that would test the limits of deception, loyalty, and power. Our story begins in 1742 in the grand yet draughty halls of Schloss Ehrenburg, the ancestral seat of the House of Wallenstein. The ruling prince, Friedrich August, was a man of middling health and great ambition. His lands bordered the powerful kingdom of Prussia to the north and the electorate of Saxony to the east, making Wallenstein a pawn in the great game of European politics. Friedrich August had married young to a Habsburg archduchess named Maria Theresa, no relation to the famous empress, but distant enough kin to borrow prestige. Their union had produced daughters, 3 healthy girls, each more beautiful than the last, but no son. In an age when Salic law still governed many German states, barring women from inheriting thrones, the lack of a male heir was a catastrophe. Upon Friedrich August's death, Wallenstein would pass to a distant cousin, a profligate spendthrift allied with the French, potentially dragging the principality into unwanted wars or dismemberment. Whispers in the court grew louder. The prince must secure the line, or all would be lost. Then, in the bitter winter of 1742, the archduchess went into labour. The birth was difficult, attended by the finest midwives from Vienna and a trusted physician sworn to secrecy. As snow blanketed the castle grounds, a child was born. The midwives' faces paled. The physician leaned close, examined, and whispered urgently to the exhausted mother. The child was a boy, small, frail, but undeniably male. Joy should have rung through the halls, but fate twisted cruelly. The infant's cries were weak, his limbs twisted in a way that suggested he might not survive childhood. Worse, in the eyes of the court, physicians, he bore signs of deformity that could mark him as unfit to rule. Perhaps a clubbed foot, perhaps something more subtle, but enough to invite ridicule and challenge. Friedrich August, summoned from his hunting lodge, arrived to a scene of hushed panic. A son, at last, yet a son who might die young or live to be mocked as the crippled prince, inviting usurpers or partition by neighbours. The archduchess, tears streaming, begged for a solution. And in that moment of desperation a radical plan was born, proposed by the loyal physician and endorsed by a handful of confidants. They would announce the birth of a princess. The child would be raised as Princess Eleanor, swaddled in lacen gowns, his true sex hidden from all but the innermost circle. Why such madness? In Wallenstein, while the throne preferred males, women could inherit in the absence of brothers, serving as regents or marrying to secure alliances. A princess could be betrothed strategically, perhaps to a powerful duke's son, preserving influence. But a deformed prince? He would be vulnerable from birth. Better, they reasoned, to hide the truth until the child grew strong enough, or until a way could be found to reveal him safely. The deception began immediately. The midwives were pensioned off to remote estates, bound by oaths and gold. A wet nurse, carefully chosen and sworn to silence, was told the infant was a girl weakened by birth. Portraits depicted a cherubic princess with rosy cheeks and golden curls. Young Eleanor was educated in the feminine arts, embroidery, dance, music, languages. But privately, under the physician's guidance, the child, whom we'll call Elias in truth, was taught riding, fencing, and the rudiments of statecraft disguised as healthy exercise. As the years passed, Elias grew into a striking figure. Tall, graceful, with sharp features and a voice that never fully deepened, thanks perhaps to herbal tonics administered in secret. The court marvelled at Princess Eleanor's poise, her intellect, her unusual strength in the saddle. Suitors arrived from across Europe, princes from Bavaria, counts from Bohemia, drawn by the prospect of marrying into a rich strategic principality. But each was politely rebuffed. Friedrich August, aging and ailing, clung to the hope that one day he could proclaim the truth. His daughter was a son, fit to rule. Yet secrets like this have a way of festering. Rumours began to circulate. A chambermaid, dismissed for theft, whispered in Vienna taverns of strange midnight lessons in the princess's chambers. A Prussian spy, embedded as a groom, noted how Eleanor avoided the intimate company of ladies-in-waiting, preferring solitary rides. And then there was the French ambassador, a sharp-eyed intriguer, who remarked in dispatches home that the princess moved with the assurance of a young cavalry officer. By 1760, Friedrich August lay dying, on his deathbed, surrounded by his wife, the physician, and a loyal chancellor. He confessed the truth to his council. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Some wept with relief. A male heir. Others paled at the scandal. Decades of lies, forged documents, potential claims of fraud. The Archduchess pleaded for revelation. Elias, now 18, stood tall in the shadows, dressed in a simple gown but with eyes burning with resolve. The council debated through the night. Reveal the prince and risk war. Prussia might claim fraud, Saxony demand partition. Keep the secret and marry Eleanor to a strong ally ruling through him. But Elias would have none of it. In a voice steady and commanding, he declared his true identity and his right to rule as Prince Elias. The revelation exploded across Europe like gunfire. Carried on the wings of couriers racing from Schloss Ehrenberg to every capital from Vienna to Versailles. Prince Elias stood before the assembled court in the great hall, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows across tapestries depicting ancient Wallenstein victories. For the first time in public, he had cast aside the elaborate gown, wearing instead a tailored coat of deep blue velvet, breeches and boots, masculine attire that had been hidden in secret trunks for years. His golden hair, once curled and beribboned, was now tied simply at the nape. The transformation was startling, yet to those who had watched Princess Eleanor grow, it somehow made sense. The broad shoulders beneath the corsets, the confident stride that no amount of training could fully suppress. The council, sworn to loyalty, proclaimed him Prince Elias August, rightful heir. His mother, the Dowager Archduchess, wept openly, clutching the rosary that had sustained her through 2 decades of deceit. But not everyone in the hall knelt in acceptance. Old Baron von Kessler, whose family had eyed the throne for generations, turned pale and muttered of forgery and madness. Whispers rippled outward. Was this a desperate hoax by a dying house? Or the truth behind years of odd rumours? Within days, the Prussian ambassador demanded an audience. Frederick the Great, ever vigilant over his southern borders, smelled opportunity. If the succession was fraudulent, Prussia could intervene as protector of imperial law. Dispatches flew to Berlin, where ministers pored over genealogical records searching for any flaw. Meanwhile, in Vienna, the Habsburg court, distant kin to the Dowager, debated quietly. Empress Maria Theresa, the real one, had no desire to see a scandal tarnish the family name, yet she could not openly endorse what many already called the Great Masquerade. Elias, now 20, faced his first test as ruler. He summoned the court physician, Dr. Heinrich von Stahl, the man who had orchestrated the deception from the cradle. In the privacy of the prince's new chambers, formerly the princess's apartments, hastily redecorated with swords and maps, Elias demanded the full truth. Were there others who knew, he asked, voice low but edged with steel. Von Stahl, greying and stooped from years of secrecy, knelt. Only 4 living souls beyond your highness and the Dowager, the Chancellor, the Captain of the Guard, and 2 midwives long since retired to estates in Bohemia. They are loyal, bound by oath and pension. He hesitated. But loyalty frays with time, and gold speaks louder to some. Elias paced, his boots echoing on the parquet floor. He had spent years preparing for this moment in secret lessons, history, strategy, the art of war. Yet nothing had prepared him for the isolation of truth revealed. Ladies who once curtsied now averted eyes, unsure how to address the figure they had gossiped about as an eligible princess. Suitors who had courted Eleanor with flowery letters now scrambled to recall if their words had been too intimate, too revealing. One such suitor was particularly dangerous, Archduke Leopold of Tuscany, a Habsburg cousin who had negotiated betrothal terms just months before. His letters to dearest Eleanor had been ardent, speaking of future children and shared rule. Now those letters, locked in a casket, could be weapons. If Leopold felt humiliated, Florence might side with skeptics, branding Elias a fraud. To counter the growing storm, Elias acted swiftly. He issued a proclamation detailing the reasons for the deception, to protect a fragile infant from assassins and usurpers in a turbulent age. He produced the original birth records, sealed and witnessed, altered only in the public announcement. And in a bold stroke he invited neutral observers, envoys from Bavaria and Hanover, to examine him privately, confirming his male physiology. The examinations were discreet, conducted behind screens by trusted physicians, but word leaked. The prince was indeed a man, healthy and whole, the childhood deformities exaggerated or outgrown. Yet proof was not acceptance. In coffee houses from Leipzig to London, pamphlets circulated with lurid illustrations, the Princess Prince exposed, some titled depicting caricatures of a half-gowned figure. Ballads were sung in taverns about the maiden who wasn't. In Paris, Voltaire himself penned a witty epistle, questioning whether Wallenstein's heir was more enigma than emperor. Elias knew he needed allies, and fast. His gaze turned northward to Prussia's great rival, Russia. Empress Elizabeth, daughter of Peter the Great, ruled a vast empire and had no love for Frederick. A marriage alliance, real this time, could secure recognition. Elias dispatched his chancellor to St. Petersburg with proposals, his hand in marriage to one of the empress's nieces, or perhaps a military pact sealed with betrothal. But before replies could return, tragedy struck. Dr. von Stahl was found dead in his chambers, an apparent suicide. Poison, the coroner declared. Yet the note left behind was curiously vague, and bruises on the doctor's wrists suggested struggle. Whispers of murder swept the castle. Was it Prussian agents silencing a key witness? Or someone closer, desperate to bury the secret forever? Elias stood vigil at the funeral, his face a mask of grief and resolve. In the crypt beneath the castle chapel, as von Stahl's coffin was lowered, the prince vowed silently, the truth would not die with its guardian. The weeks following Dr. von Stahl's death were among the darkest Schloss Ehrenberg had ever known. Servants moved through the corridors in near silence, glancing over shoulders as if the very walls might be listening. Prince Elias ordered a quiet investigation, entrusting it to Captain Lucas von Brandt, the grizzled commander of the palace guard and one of the few who had known the secret from the beginning. Von Brandt's men searched the physician's rooms and found a hidden drawer containing letters, some in code, others in plain German, addressed to an unknown recipient in Dresden, the capital of Saxony. One letter, half burned in the grate, contained a chilling phrase. The child lives as a lie, and lies cannot inherit thrones. Elias read it by candlelight, his jaw tightening. Saxony, ever ambitious, bordered Wallenstein to the east, and had long coveted its rich silver mines. If August the Strong's successors believed they could prove the succession fraudulent, they might press a claim through some distant female line, or simply invade under the pretext of restoring imperial order. Elias knew he could not fight on two fronts. Prussia to the north, Saxony to the east, both circling like wolves. He needed time, legitimacy, and above all, a powerful friend. The reply from St. Petersburg finally arrived in the spring of 1761, sealed with the double-headed eagle of Russia. Empress Elizabeth, intrigued by the scandal that had reached even her distant court, expressed sympathy for the young prince cruelly hidden by fate. She invited Elias to send a trusted envoy to discuss matters of mutual benefit. The envoy chosen was none other than Elias himself. In a decision that shocked the council, the prince announced he would travel incognito to Russia, accompanied only by a small retinue. Paper alliances are easily torn, he declared. I will place my case before the empress in person. His mother begged him to reconsider. Journeys across war-torn Poland were perilous, but Elias was resolute. He had spent his life confined by a lie. Now he would seize his destiny. Disguised as a minor Polish nobleman, Count Elias Wolski, the prince set out in early summer. The party travelled by coach through Silesia, avoiding main roads where Prussian patrols roamed. They crossed rivers swollen with meltwater and camped in forests alive with night sounds. For the first time in his life, Elias wore men's clothing openly day after day. Simple riding coat, boots, a sabre at his side. Captain von Brandt rode beside him, teaching him the easy banter of soldiers around the campfire. At night, Elias stared into the flames, wondering who he truly was. The princess who had curtsied to ambassadors, or the prince now free to draw breath without constraint. After 6 grueling weeks, they reached the gilded spires of St. Petersburg. The city dazzled. Canals reflecting palaces of turquoise and gold, bridges thronged with merchants from every corner of the world. At the Winter Palace, Elias was granted a private audience. Empress Elizabeth, daughter of Peter the Great, received him in a small salon hung with tapestries of Siberian hunts. She was in her 50s, striking still, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "So," she said in French, the language of courts, "you are the famous Princess Prince." Her tone held amusement rather than scorn. Elias bowed deeply, then met her gaze. For an hour he spoke, not of politics first, but of his life. The gowns that had chafed like chains, the midnight lessons in swordplay, the fear that had governed every breath. Elizabeth listened intently, occasionally asking gentle questions. When he finished, she rose and placed a hand on his shoulder. "My father remade himself from nothing," she said quietly. "He understood that crowns are taken by those bold enough to wear them. You, young man, have worn a heavier disguise than most." The alliance was sealed that night, though not quite as Elias had imagined. Elizabeth had no eligible nieces of marriageable age, but she offered something better: recognition of Elias as legitimate heir, backed by Russian troops stationed near the Polish border as a warning to Prussia and Saxony. In return, Wallenstein would grant Russia favourable trade terms for grain and timber, and a secret clause promised military cooperation should Frederick of Prussia move against either state. Elias remained in Russia for 3 months, feted at balls and reviews. Courtiers marvelled at the elegant young prince who danced with effortless grace, yet could hold his own in debates on tactics with generals. Rumours of his beauty spread. Tall, fair, with eyes the colour of a winter sky. Portraits were painted showing him in Russian-style uniform, sabre at his side. One of these portraits would later hang in the Hermitage, labelled simply Prince E of V. But even in St. Petersburg, shadows followed. One evening, during a masquerade at Peterhof, a masked figure in black approached Elias on the terrace overlooking the fountains. "Your doctor's death was no suicide," the stranger whispered in German. "Ask your captain about the Saxon gold." Before Elias could seize him, the figure melted into the crowd. That night, Elias confronted von Brandt, who paled and admitted that during the investigation a servant had vanished, last seen taking a purse from a man with a Saxon accent. The prince's blood ran cold. Betrayal within his inner circle. Von Brandt swore his own loyalty, but trust, once cracked, is slow to mend. As autumn painted the Neva gold, Elias prepared to return home, his position immeasurably strengthened. Russian recognition had forced Vienna to follow suit. Maria Theresa sent a cautiously worded letter acknowledging Prince Elias August as rightful ruler. Even Frederick the Great, occupied with manoeuvres elsewhere, sent a cool note of congratulations, though Elias knew it for the warning it was. Yet the greatest challenge still lay ahead: securing his dynasty. At 21, Elias needed an heir of unquestioned legitimacy. Suitors now came as to a prince, not a princess, but Elias viewed each proposal warily. He would not marry merely for politics. The years of deception had taught him the cost of a loveless facade. Little did he know that fate had already set a far more personal trial in motion, one that would reach across oceans and years, threatening to unravel everything he had fought to claim. Upon his return to Schloss Ehrenberg in the winter of 1762, Prince Elias was greeted as a conquering hero. The townspeople lined the snow-dusted roads, cheering the young ruler who had secured the mighty Russian bear as protector. Cannons boomed from the ramparts, and the Dowager Archduchess embraced her son publicly for the first time without the old fear in her eyes. Russian recognition had changed everything. Prussian spies withdrew, Saxon envoys grew polite, and even Frederick the Great sent a magnificently jewelled snuff-box as a backhanded gesture of truce. Yet the prince's triumph was tempered by the lingering mystery of Dr. von Stahl's death and the masked warning in St. Petersburg. Elias quietly replaced several palace officials and doubled the guard. Captain von Brandt, though still trusted, was watched closely. The prince immersed himself in governance, reforming taxes, modernising the small army, and commissioning new mines in the hills. He ruled with a blend of feminine grace learned in childhood and masculine decisiveness honed in secret, courteous in council, ruthless when needed. It was during this time that a new figure entered the story, one who would alter Elias's life forever. In the spring of 1763, an English diplomatic mission arrived from London. King George III, seeking continental allies against French ambitions, dispatched Sir William Harcourt, a seasoned envoy, to sound out the smaller German states. Accompanying Sir William was his youngest daughter, Lady Charlotte Harcourt, 20 years old, accomplished, and renowned in London society for her wit and independence. Lady Charlotte was no delicate English rose. Raised in the intellectual salons of Bloomsbury, she spoke fluent French and German, rode astride when away from prying eyes, and had scandalised her mother by reading Voltaire openly. Tall, with auburn hair and direct green eyes, she arrived at Ehrenberg in a travelling coat of forest green, declining the offered sedan chair to walk the castle steps herself. Elias first saw her at the welcoming banquet. Seated at the high table, he watched as she conversed easily with the Dowager Archduchess about Habsburg politics, then turned to debate mining yields with the Chancellor. Something stirred in him, a recognition perhaps of a spirit as unbound by convention as his own had been forced to be. When protocol allowed, he approached. "Lady Charlotte," he said in perfect English, bowing over her hand, "I trust your journey through our forests was not too taxing." She met his gaze steadily. "Not at all, Your Highness. I find German roads far more honest than English ones. They do not pretend to be smooth when they are not." A ripple of laughter went around the table. Elias smiled genuinely. For the first time since his revelation, conversation felt effortless. Over the following weeks, as Sir William negotiated trade terms and mutual defence clauses, Charlotte and Elias found excuses to meet. They rode together through the pine-scented hills, discussing everything from loch to landscape gardens. She spoke of the stifling expectations placed on English noblewomen. He listened, careful not to reveal too much of his own past. Yet gradually fragments emerged, a childhood spent more in libraries than ballrooms, lessons that felt like disguises, a sense of always performing. One afternoon, beside a rushing mountain stream, Charlotte turned to him suddenly. "They say in London that you were raised as a girl to protect the succession. Is it true?" The directness caught him off guard. For a moment the old fear rose, exposure, ridicule. But her expression held only curiosity, not judgment. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is true." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you understand better than most what it is to live a lie not of your own making." That evening Elias sought out his mother. "I wish to court Lady Charlotte," he declared. The dowager's eyes filled with tears, of relief, of hope. An English alliance would anchor Wallenstein to Hanoverian interests, counterbalancing Russia without dependence. Sir William, when approached, was cautious but not opposed. George III desired friends in Germany, and Charlotte's happiness mattered to him. Yet he required assurances. The succession scandal must not taint his daughter. Elias provided documents, testimonies from Vienna and St. Petersburg, even a sealed affidavit from the remaining midwives. Slowly, permission was granted. The courtship unfolded through the summer of 1763. Elias gifted Charlotte a magnificent Arabian mare. She taught him the English waltz, laughing when he stepped on her toes. Letters flew between them when duty separated them, hers frank and humorous, his thoughtful and increasingly tender. In September, beneath the ancient oak in the castle gardens, Elias proposed. Charlotte accepted without hesitation, kissing him openly in a way that would have scandalised half the courts of Europe. There, Betrothal was announced with great pomp. Invitations went out to every significant house: Habsburg, archdukes, Prussian princes, even a representative from Versailles. The wedding was set for the following spring in the cathedral at Ehrenberg, to be followed by a coronation ceremony uniting Elias and Charlotte as prince and princess consort. But secrets, even when seemingly buried, have a way of clawing back to the surface. In the winter of 1763-64, a stranger appeared at the castle gates, a woman heavily veiled claiming urgent private audience. She was admitted to the dowager's apartments and there revealed herself as Anna, one of the original midwives, now elderly, frail, and terrified. She had fled her Bohemian estate after receiving threats. In her trembling hands she carried a bundle of letters, correspondence from Dr. von Stahl, written years earlier, detailing the birth and the decision to deceive. "I kept them for safety," she whispered, "but now someone hunts them. Saxon agents, I think. They burned my cottage. They will kill to prove the prince illegitimate." The letters were explosive. Explicit descriptions of the infant's male sex, the deliberate announcement of a princess, even notes on herbal treatments to delay puberty and soften features. If published, they could reignite every doubt. Elias read them by firelight, face grim. Charlotte, now privy to the inner circle, sat beside him. "We burn them," she said firmly, "and we protect the woman." But it was not so simple. Anna confessed that before fleeing she had sent copies to a trusted priest in Prague. For safekeeping, she thought. If the Saxons found that priest... Elias acted swiftly. He dispatched Captain von Brandt with a squad of trusted men to Prague, racing against winter snows. Meanwhile, Anna was hidden in the castle's deepest chambers, guarded day and night. As Christmas approached, tension gripped Ehrenberg like frost. And then, on a bitter December night, the storm broke. On that bitter December night in 1763, as the castle slept under a thick blanket of snow, the alarm bells rang out from the eastern tower. Torches flared along the battlements as guards shouted that riders had been spotted on the Prague road. Too many, too fast, bearing no colours. Captain von Brandt, roused from his bed, buckled on his sword and raced to the prince's apartments. Elias was already awake, pulling on boots beside a worried Charlotte. "They've come for the midwife," Elias said grimly, "or for the letters." Von Brandt's face was grave. "My men in Prague sent a rider ahead. He arrived half frozen an hour ago. The priest was taken 2 days past, tortured. He gave up the copies before he died." Elias felt ice settle in his veins. If Saxon agents now held Dr. von Stahl's explicit records, the scandal would not merely resurface, it would consume Warenstein. Every court in Europe would receive packets of proof that the prince had been raised as a princess through deliberate fraud. Alliances would crumble, armies might march. "There is still Anna," Charlotte said quietly. "The original midwife here. She knows where the priest hid a second set, as insurance." Elias turned to von Brandt. "Wake her. Bring her to the council chamber and double the gates." Within the hour, the small inner circle gathered in the oak-panelled room lit by a roaring fire. Elias, Charlotte, the Dowager Archduchess, von Brandt, and old Anna trembling in a borrowed cloak. The midwife's voice shook as she spoke. "The priest buried a sealed tube beneath the altar of St. Vitus in Prague. Only he and I knew the exact stone. If the Saxons have not found it yet, they will tear the cathedral apart," von Brandt finished. Elias made his decision in an instant. "We ride for Prague tonight. A small party, fast horses, no banners. We retrieve the documents before dawn and burn them in the cathedral itself if need be." Charlotte stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." The dowager protested, but Charlotte's green eyes were steady. "I speak better Czech than any of you, and I know how to pass as a common traveller. You'll need me if we're stopped." Elias looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Love, trust, and necessity bound them now more tightly than any vow. 6 riders slipped out a postern gate just before midnight. Elias, Charlotte, von Brandt, 2 trusted guards, and Anna wrapped in furs on a quiet mare. They took the old smuggler's track through the forest, avoiding the main roads where Saxon scouts might watch. Snow muffled the horses' hooves. The only sounds were the creak of leather and the riders' steady breathing. By dawn they reached the Vltava river, its waters black under a leaden sky. Prague rose before them, spires piercing the mist like accusing fingers. They entered the city as merchants seeking shelter from the cold, hoods drawn low. Von Brandt bribed a side-door verger at St. Vitus Cathedral with a purse of gold, and the party was admitted to the vast, echoing nave while the city still slept. Anna led them to the side chapel of St. Wenceslas. Kneeling before the altar, she pressed trembling fingers against the stones until one shifted. Beneath lay an iron tube sealed with wax. Elias lifted it out, heart pounding. Inside, von Stahl's letters, copies in the doctor's precise hand. Just as Elias tucked the tube inside his coat, the great west doors boomed open. Booted footsteps echoed. 20, perhaps 30 men, Saxon uniforms glinting in the torchlight. Their captain, a scarred veteran named von Rieden, strode forward. By order of his Elector of Saxony, we claim those documents. Surrender them, and no blood need be shed in this holy place. Elias's hand went to his sabre. Von Brandt and the guards fanned out. Charlotte, pale but composed, slipped behind a pillar. There is nothing here but prayer, Elias called back, voice ringing clear, in the vaulted space. Leave, or face the consequences, von Rieden laughed. 6 against 30? Even your little English bride cannot save you. Still rasped as swords were drawn. The Saxons advanced. What followed was chaos in the half-light. Elias fought like a man possessed, years of secret fencing lessons now unleashed. His blade flashed, parrying thrusts, seeking openings. Von Brandt roared orders, holding the narrow aisle between pews. One guard fell almost immediately, a Saxon bayonet in his throat. Charlotte, unseen, had climbed the spiral stairs to the organ loft. Thinking quickly, she seized a heavy silver candelabrum and hurled it down onto the Saxons below. It struck von Redden, second in command, staggering him. Shouts of confusion rose. Elias saw his chance. "To the side door!" he shouted. They fought their way toward a small transept exit. Anna clutched between von Brandt and the remaining guard. Elias duelled von Rieden himself. The Saxon was larger, heavier, but slower. A clever feint and riposte sent the captain's sword spinning. Elias pressed the point to von Rieden's throat. "Order your men back," he commanded. Von Rieden spat blood but complied. The Saxons retreated a few paces. Elias backed toward the door, tube secure. But as they reached the threshold, a crossbow bolt whistled from the shadows, striking von Brandt in the shoulder. The captain staggered but stayed on his feet. Outside, fresh horses waited, arranged by the bribed verger. The party mounted and thundered across the Charles Bridge as church bells began to toll the alarm. Behind them, Saxon horns sounded the pursuit. For 2 days they rode hard, changing mounts at hidden farms loyal to Warenstein. Von Brandt's wound slowed them, but Charlotte bound it skillfully with strips from her petticoat. On the third night, camped in a ruined mill deep in the Bohemian forest, Elias opened the tube by firelight and fed every letter to the flames. Anna wept quietly. "It is done. The last proof is gone." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have saved my house. You will live out your days in honour." But the cost had been high. 1 guard dead, von Brandt gravely wounded, and Saxon blood spilled on consecrated ground. Word would reach Dresden, and from there, every court in Europe. When they finally rode wearily back into Ehrenberg on a cold January morning in 1764, the castle flags flew at half-mast for the fallen guard. Yet the people cheered their prince and his brave English lady, rumours of the daring ride already spreading like wildfire. The wedding, postponed by the crisis, was now set for Easter. And though Saxony fumed and Prussia watched hungrily, no fresh documents emerged to challenge Elias's legitimacy. The secret, for now, burned only to ash. But Europe's great game was far from over, and a new player was about to enter the board, one carrying a grudge older than Elias himself. The new player emerged in the spring of 1764, just as the lilacs began to bloom along the castle walls, and preparations for the royal wedding reached fever pitch. A sealed letter arrived from Vienna bearing the imperial eagle and addressed personally to Prince Elias. It was delivered by a grave-faced Habsburg courier who refused all refreshment and departed the moment the prince broke the seal. Inside was a short note from Prince Kaunitz, the powerful chancellor to Empress Maria Theresa. Your Highness is invited to an audience at the Hofburg on a matter of gravest familial consequence. Come alone. Bring no English escort. The dowager your mother will understand the necessity." Elias read it twice, a chill settling despite the warm May air. His mother, when shown the letter, went ashen. "This is no ordinary summons," she whispered. "Kaunitz writes only when the Empress herself commands silence." For years the Habsburgs had maintained a cautious distance, acknowledging Elias publicly to avoid scandal, yet never fully embracing him. Now, suddenly, a private audience and the pointed exclusion of Charlotte suggested something deeper, something tied to blood. Elias sailed down the Danube alone, travelling under the simple title of Count von Ehrenberg to avoid fanfare. Vienna in late spring was a whirl of colour. Carriages clattered over cobblestones, courtiers in powdered wigs strolled the gardens of Schönbrunn, and the scent of coffee and fresh pastries drifted from every café. Yet Elias felt no lightness. He was ushered through side entrances of the Hofburg, past guards who averted their eyes, until he reached a small antechamber hung with dark portraits of long-dead emperors. Prince Kaunitz awaited him, tall and austere, his face a mask of diplomatic inscrutability. Without preamble, he led Elias into an inner salon where Empress Maria Theresa herself sat by a window overlooking the palace square. She was in her late 40s, regal in black and gold, her expression unreadable. "Prince Elias," she began in measured tones, "or should I say, nephew?" The word struck like a thunderbolt. Elias froze, every lesson in courtly composure deserting him. Maria Theresa gestured to a chair. "Sit. What I am about to tell you has been locked in Habsburg archives for 2 decades, known only to my late husband, myself, and one other who is now dead." She drew a breath. "In 1741, before my marriage to Francis Stephen, there was a brief entanglement with a young officer of the guard. A son was born in secret, placed with loyal retainers far from Vienna to avoid scandal. That child was your father, Friedrich August, acknowledged privately by my husband as his own for the sake of peace, but never publicly. You, Elias, carry Habsburg blood through me. You are my grandson." Elias's mind reeled. All his life he had believed Friedrich August a minor Wittelsbach cousin, distant enough to rule Wallenstein without imperial interference. Now this, direct descent from the Empress herself, hidden to protect her reputation during the turbulent years of the Austrian Succession War. "Why tell me now?" he managed at last. Kaunitz answered, "Because the Saxon court has begun whispering of your illegitimacy again. They claim the deception of your upbringing proves the entire Wallenstein line fraudulent. But if you are openly acknowledged as Habsburg, my grandson, then any challenge collapses. Saxony would not dare move against imperial blood." Maria Theresa leaned forward, her gaze intense. "There is a price. You will marry, yes, but not the English girl. A union within the family, or at least with a Catholic German house of our choosing, to keep Wallenstein firmly in the imperial orbit. Russia is useful, England dangerous. Your Charlotte Harcourt represents Hanoverian interests, George III's interests. We cannot allow it." Elias felt the walls closing in, the old familiar cage of secrets and duty. Charlotte, his brave companion in Prague, the woman who had seen him truly, reduced to a political liability. "I have given my word," he said quietly. "The banns are read. Half of Europe expects the wedding." "Half of Europe expects many things that never come to pass," Kaunitz replied coolly. "Break the betrothal quietly, compensate the lady. England will protest, but George has no stomach for war over a broken engagement." Maria Theresa's voice softened, almost maternal. "You are young, Elias. There will be other brides, suitable ones who do not bring the risk of dragging us into Britain's quarrels with France." He left Vienna 2 days later with a sealed patent of legitimacy in his saddlebag, proof of his Habsburg descent to be revealed only if Saxony pressed its claims, and a heart heavy with conflict. The journey home along the Danube felt endless, each bend in the river mirroring the twists of his fate. Charlotte met him at the castle gate, eyes bright with joy that faded the moment she saw his face. That night, in the privacy of the dowager's winter garden, Elias told her everything. She listened without interruption, auburn hair glowing in the candlelight. When he finished, silence stretched between them. "So I am to be cast aside," she said at last, voice steady but laced with pain, "like an inconvenient treaty." "Never cast aside," Elias protested. "I love you, but if I defy Vienna they may withhold recognition. Saxony could invade within months. My people—" "Your people," Charlotte echoed. "And what of me? I rode through the night, fought in a cathedral, burned the proof of your past with my own hands. Was that only politics too?" Elias reached for her, but she stepped back. "I need time," she whispered, and left him among the orange trees. For weeks, the castle simmered with unspoken tension. Charlotte remained polite in public, but private moments were few. Elias threw himself into wedding preparations that now felt like a charade, while couriers raced between Ehrenberg and Vienna carrying ever more urgent demands. Then, in June, a new letter arrived, not from Kaunitz, but from Maria Theresa herself, written in her own hand. "The Saxon elector prepares to bring your case before the imperial diet. Unless the English match is abandoned and a new bride chosen from the list enclosed, Archduchess Maria Antonia is too young, but her sister Maria Carolina would suit. Wallenstein will be declared in rebellion. Choose, grandson, blood or sentiment." Elias stood alone on the battlements that night, the patent of legitimacy in one hand, Charlotte's last letter, tender, trusting, in the other. Below, the town lights twinkled peacefully, unaware that their future hung on his decision. For the first time since casting off his gowns, Prince Elias felt truly trapped. The summer of 1764 passed in a haze of forced festivity at Schloss Ehrenberg. Gardens bloomed with roses imported from England as wedding gifts, musicians rehearsed coronation fanfares, and seamstresses laboured over Charlotte's gown of silver tissue embroidered with pearls. Yet beneath the splendour, the castle felt like a powder keg awaiting a spark. Elias could not bring himself to break the betrothal. Each time he tried to speak the words to Charlotte, they died in his throat. She, sensing the storm, withdrew into cool courtesy, spending hours riding alone or corresponding with her father in London. Sir William Harcourt, alarmed by rumours filtering through diplomatic channels, wrote urgent letters demanding clarity. George III himself penned a note reminding Elias of England's friendship, and the consequences of trifling with an English gentlewoman. In July, Elias made a desperate gamble. He dispatched a trusted envoy to St. Petersburg, begging Empress Elizabeth for intervention. Russia's earlier support had been decisive. Perhaps the threat of Russian troops on the Polish border would force Vienna to back down. The envoy returned in August with grim news. Elizabeth had suffered a stroke and lay gravely ill. Her court was in chaos, succession whispers already circling her nephew and heir, Peter. Russia could promise nothing. Elias's options dwindled. Defy Vienna openly, and Wallenstein risked isolation, perhaps even imperial ban and partition between Austria and Saxony. Yield, and he lost Charlotte forever, condemning himself to a marriage of cold calculation. One sweltering August evening, as thunder rumbled over the hills, Charlotte confronted him in the library. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound volumes that had been Elias's refuge in childhood. "I deserve the truth," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "All of it." He told her everything. The Habsburg revelation, Maria Theresa's ultimatum, the list of approved brides headed by Archduchess Maria Carolina. When he finished, Charlotte's face was pale but composed. "So the obstacle," she said. "The English girl who threatens imperial purity." "You're the woman I love," Elias replied fiercely. "The only one who has ever seen me. Not the princess, not the prince, but me." She crossed to him, placing a hand on his cheek. "Then fight for us. Not with swords this time, but with cunning. Maria Theresa fears scandal above all. She built her legend on piety and family. Give her a scandal she cannot afford." Elias stared. "What do you mean?" Charlotte's eyes gleamed with the same daring that had hurled a candelabrum in Prague Cathedral. "Marry me secretly, now, before Vienna can stop it. Once done, the Church will not dissolve a consummated union between Catholics, and George III will not allow his subject to be cast off. Present the Empress with a fait accompli. She will rage, but she will accept. Better a quietly angry granddaughter-in-law than open war with England and whatever allies we can muster." It was audacious, bordering on madness. Yet in that moment, Elias felt hope flare like a torch in darkness. They acted swiftly. The castle chaplain, an elderly priest loyal to the dowager, was summoned at midnight. Only 4 witnesses: the dowager archduchess herself, Captain von Brandt, shoulder-heeled but scarred, Anna the midwife, now a permanent resident, and Charlotte's English maid who had accompanied her from London. In the small chapel deep within the castle, lit by a dozen candles, Elias and Charlotte exchanged vows. She wore a simple gown of white silk saved for the rehearsal, he his dress uniform. The rings were old family pieces from the dowager's jewel box. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, Charlotte kissed Elias with a passion that left no doubt of consummation to come. Afterward, in the prince's apartments, they made love for the first time, slowly, reverently, as though sealing a pact against the world. Charlotte whispered against his skin, "Now we are bound. Let Vienna do its worst." News was dispatched immediately. To Sir William in residence, who received it with stunned joy. To London, where George III would learn his subject was now a German princess consort. And, most crucially, to Vienna, via a courier instructed to ride with all speed. Maria Theresa's reply arrived 10 days later, delivered by an imperial herald flanked by dragoons, a deliberate show of force. The Empress was furious. The letter, read aloud in the Great Hall, accused Elias of ingratitude, deceit, and reckless endangerment of imperial interests. She threatened to withhold the patent of Habsburg legitimacy, leaving Wallenstein vulnerable to Saxon claims. But Charlotte had judged correctly. Maria Theresa stopped short of outright rupture. The marriage was legal, sacramental, and already consummated. Whispers of Charlotte's delicate condition would soon circulate, whether true or strategic. To annul it would require papal intervention, difficult, time-consuming, and scandalous. Moreover, England reacted swiftly. George III sent a warm letter of congratulations and dispatched a Royal Navy squadron to the Baltic for manoeuvres, a clear warning that Britain took its princess seriously. Saxony, sensing the shifting winds, went quiet. Without imperial backing, their claims lacked teeth. In September, Empress Elizabeth of Russia died. Her nephew Peter III ascended briefly, only to be overthrown months later by his wife Catherine, soon to be the Great. Catherine, pragmatic and ambitious, renewed Russia's alliance with Wallenstein, intrigued by tales of the bold prince and his English bride. Maria Theresa, after months of icy silence, finally relented. In December 1764, a second Habsburg courier arrived bearing the sealed patent acknowledging Elias as her grandson, and grudgingly Charlotte as his lawful wife. A private note accompanied it. "You have your English girl. Pray she brings you wisdom as well as courage." The public wedding, long planned, became a celebration rather than a ceremony. On a crisp Easter morning in 1765, beneath the cathedral's vaulted roof, Elias and Charlotte processed to the altar, amid pealing bells and cheering crowds. She wore the silver gown at last, a coronet of diamonds on her auburn hair. He the full regalia of a prince, the Habsburg patent displayed prominently. As vows were renewed before Europe's assembled nobility, Elias looked at his wife and knew the deception of his youth had forged something stronger, a partnership of equals, tempered in fire. Yet even as rose petals rained upon them, shadows lingered. Old Baron von Kessler, long suspected of Saxon sympathies, had vanished weeks before the ceremony. Whispers persisted of forged documents still hidden somewhere, waiting for a future crisis. And in the family crypt, beside Dr. von Stahl's tomb, a new inscription was added to the Wallenstein vault. "Truth, like stone, endures." But for now, Prince Elias and Princess Charlotte ruled in peace, their secrets safe, at least until the next turn of Europe's endless wheel. The years following the grand wedding of 1765 settled into a rhythm of cautious prosperity for Wallenstein. Prince Elias and Princess Charlotte ruled with a blend of progressive ideas borrowed from England and pragmatic statecraft honed in the crucible of secrets. New roads snaked through the hills to the silver mines, schools opened in the villages teaching both German and English, and the small army was drilled in the latest Prussian tactics, ironic given the old enmities, but Elias believed in learning from every quarter. In the autumn of 1766, Charlotte gave birth to a son, Friedrich Wilhelm, named for Elias's late father, and Charlotte's Royal English connections. The christening was a triumph, with envoys from Vienna, London, and even a grudgingly polite one from Dresden in attendance. Maria Theresa sent a magnificent font of solid silver, her private note to Elias warmer than any before. "May this child unite what politics divided." The baby's cries echoed through the cathedral, a living rebuttal to every lingering whisper of illegitimacy. Yet peace in 18th century Europe was ever fragile. In 1768, rumours reached Ehrenberg of unrest in Poland, the Balkan Federation rising against Russian influence, Saxon ambitions stirring anew. Catherine the Great, now firmly on the throne, wrote personally to Elias requesting passage for Russian troops through Wallenstein lands, a small favour, she implied, for past support. Elias hesitated. Granting it would anger Vienna and Prussia. Refusing might cost Russian protection. Charlotte, ever the strategist, proposed a middle path. Allow passage but under strict conditions, no foraging, no permanent garrisons, and extract concessions in return. Catherine agreed, granting Wallenstein lucrative trade rights along the Baltic. When Prussian spies protested, Elias invited Frederick the Great's envoy to a lavish hunt, charming him with tales of his Russian journey until the protests faded to grumbles. Privately, the couple flourished. Charlotte introduced English gardens to the castle terraces, rolling lawns, classical follies, hidden grottos where they could escape court eyes. Elias, freed from the constraints of his youth, became an avid collector of art, commissioning portraits that captured Charlotte's spirited gaze and little Friedrich's sturdy limbs. One famous painting by a visiting Venetian master showed the family in the great hall. Elias in princely blue, Charlotte radiant beside him, their son on her lap clutching a tiny sword, a deliberate symbol of unbroken succession. But old shadows never fully dispersed. In 1770, Captain von Brandt, now greying and promoted to Chancellor, brought disturbing news. Old Baron von Kessler, the long-vanished courtier suspected of Saxon ties, had been spotted in Dresden. More alarmingly, he was in the company of a mysterious woman claiming to possess documents that would shake thrones. Elias dismissed it at first as empty boasting, but caution prevailed. He sent trusted agents to Dresden under cover of trade negotiations. They returned with a chilling report. Von Kessler had fallen into debt and drink, selling tales of the old scandal to anyone who would listen. The woman was his daughter, illegitimate and bitter, armed with what she claimed was a final copy of Dr. von Stahl's notes, supposedly hidden separately all those years ago. Charlotte listened gravely as Elias recounted the intelligence. "We thought Prague ended it," she said, "but some weeds root deeper." They debated through the night. Confront von Kessler openly, bribe him, or something more permanent? Elias recoiled from assassination. His rule would not be built on poison like so many others. Instead, they chose subtlety. Von Brandt travelled to Dresden incognito, posing as a bohemian antiquarian interested in old medical texts. Through intermediaries, he met von Kessler's daughter in a smoky tavern. She was sharp-featured, hardened by years of scraping by on her father's faded name. For a price, she produced a sheaf of papers, yellowed, water-stained, but bearing von Stahl's unmistakable hand. Von Brandt paid handsomely, then watched as the woman drank herself into a stupor. While she slept, his men searched her lodgings and found the hiding place, a false bottom in an old trunk containing the originals. They replaced them with clever forgeries, similar wording but altered dates that contradicted known events, rendering them useless as proof. When von Kessler awoke the next day to discover the switch, panic set in. He fled Dresden that night, only to be arrested at the border by Saxon authorities tipped off anonymously that he carried seditious materials. The forgeries were discovered, branding him a forger himself. He died in prison 2 years later, disgraced and forgotten, his daughter vanishing into obscurity. Wallenstein breathed easier. The last tangible threat seemed extinguished. As the 1770s progressed, Europe convulsed with greater storms. The partition of Poland, growing tensions in the American colonies, Enlightenment ideas seeping into even conservative courts. Elias and Charlotte hosted philosophers and scientists. Voltaire himself corresponded with Charlotte, praising her translations of English works into German. Their court became known as a haven of moderate enlightenment, serfdom eased, religious tolerance expanded, a small academy founded in the capital. In 774, Charlotte bore a second child, a daughter named Maria Theresa, in a gesture of reconciliation to Vienna. The Empress, now in her later years, sent a portrait of herself as a young mother, a rare personal gift. Relations thawed further, yet Elias never forgot the cost of secrets. On quiet evenings, he and Charlotte would walk the battlements, watching the sun set over their peaceful lands. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked once. "The deception, the danger, all for a throne." He considered, wind ruffling his hair now touched with early grey. "I regret the fear it bred in my mother, the lies we all lived. But without it, I might never have become the man you could love, nor the ruler this land needed." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "Then perhaps some secrets serve a purpose, so long as they end with us." And for a time, it seemed they had. As the 1780s dawned, Wallenstein basked in an era of relative calm that many small German states could only envy. The great powers, Austria, Prussia and Russia, were preoccupied with the unfolding crisis in Bavaria, following the death of the childless Elector Maximilian Joseph in 1787. The War of the Bavarian Succession, brief and oddly bloodless, kept the wolves at bay from lesser principalities. Elias used the breathing space wisely. He modernized the silver mines with English steam engines imported through Charlotte's Hanoverian connections, built a porcelain manufactory that rivaled Meissen, and even established a small theatre in the capital where German translations of Shakespeare drew applause from visiting nobles. Their children grew apace. Young Friedrich Wilhelm, the heir, was a sturdy boy of 14 by 1780, already proficient with horse and sabre, tutored jointly by Prussian drill masters and English scholars. Little Maria Theresa, called Marie by the family, had her mother's auburn hair and fearless spirit, charming courtiers with precocious questions about politics and astronomy. 2 more children followed, Karl in 1778, a quiet, bookish boy, and Sophia in 1782, the baby whose laughter echoed through the castle corridors. Yet even in this golden interlude, Elias and Charlotte never fully lowered their guard. They had learned that secrets once birthed possess a stubborn vitality. In 1783, a travelling bookseller from Leipzig was detained at the border with a trunk of forbidden pamphlets. Among them was a thinly veiled satire titled The Princess Prince of V, illustrated with crude woodcuts of a figure half in gown, half in uniform. The author was anonymous, but the printer's mark traced back to Dresden. Elias ordered the pamphlets burned and the bookseller quietly expelled, yet copies had already circulated in Vienna and Berlin coffeehouses. Whispers resurfaced. Was the Wallenstein heir truly legitimate, or the product of an elaborate fraud? Charlotte, now in her early 40s and still striking, dismissed the satire with public laughter, hosting a masked ball where guests were encouraged to come as historical enigmas. She herself appeared as Joan of Arc, armour gleaming, while Elias attended as Chevalier d'Eon, the real-life French diplomat whose ambiguous gender had scandalised Europe. The court roared with delight, and the pamphlet's sting was drawn by ridicule. Privately, however, Elias doubled the palace archives guards and ordered every remaining personal record from his childhood locked in an iron chest. The true test came in 1787, when Empress Maria Theresa, the iron-willed matriarch who had reluctantly accepted Charlotte, passed away at last. Her son Joseph II, enlightened but imperious, ascended as sole ruler. Joseph had little patience for the intricate web of family secrets his mother had tolerated. Almost immediately, dispatches from Vienna grew cooler. Joseph, obsessed with centralizing Habsburg power, viewed semi-independent German principalities like Wallenstein as relics to be absorbed or disciplined. In the spring of 1788, an imperial commissioner arrived unannounced, Count von Mercy-Argenteau, a stiff-necked diplomat who had once served Marie Antoinette in France. He demanded, access to the Wallenstein archives, citing irregularities in the succession records that required clarification for the imperial register. Elias received him in the Great Hall with full ceremony, but the message was clear. Joseph sought leverage. That night, Elias and Charlotte pored over possibilities, refuse the commissioner and risk imperial displeasure, perhaps even troops, comply and invite scrutiny of documents that, while carefully curated, might still contain dangerous inconsistencies. Charlotte's solution was characteristically bold. "Give him what he wants," she said, "but drown him in it." Over the following weeks, von Mercy-Argenteau was presented with mountains of ledgers, birth records of every noble child in Wallenstein for 50 years, marriage contracts, tax rolls, even laundry inventories. The commissioner's clerks sifted through dusty tomes in a chamber, deliberately kept cold and dimly lit. Meanwhile, Elias quietly removed the iron chest to a hidden vault beneath the chapel, accessible only through a concealed door behind the altar. Von Mercy-Argenteau grew frustrated. He hinted darkly at rumours from Saxon sources, rumours of a child raised as the wrong sex, of forged announcements. Elias met each insinuation with mild surprise and invitations to dinner, where Charlotte dazzled the commissioner with conversation about Parisian fashions and Enlightenment philosophy. Slowly the Austrians' resolve weakened. Joseph II, distracted by revolts in the Netherlands and Hungary, sent impatient letters demanding results. In the end, von Mercy-Argenteau departed with a bland report affirming the regularity of the Wallenstein succession. Privately, he wrote to Vienna that, while village gossip persists, no documentary proof of irregularity exists. Elias celebrated quietly, toasting Charlotte with English claret. They had won another round, but Europe was tilting toward greater upheaval. In the summer of 1789, news arrived from Paris. The Bastille had fallen. Revolutionaries stormed the streets. The king and queen, Marie Antoinette, Joseph's own sister, were virtual prisoners. Dispatches spoke of nobles fleeing, of tricolour cockades and cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité. Wallenstein felt the tremors. Radical pamphlets began appearing in the markets, questioning the divine right of princes. A young schoolmaster in the capital was arrested for reading Rousseau aloud to his pupils. Elias, ever pragmatic, instituted reforms to blunt the revolutionary edge. He abolished the last remnants of serfdom, reduced court extravagance, and established a consultative assembly of landowners and burghers. Better to give a little than lose everything, he told Charlotte. She agreed, though her English blood ran cold at tales of French aristocrats dragged to the guillotine. Letters from her family in London spoke of refugee émigrés flooding Dover, of Pitt's government watching the Channel warily, as 1792 brought war between revolutionary France and a coalition of monarchies. Wallenstein's position grew precarious. Austria and Prussia, old rivals, marched together against the revolutionary armies. Smaller states were pressed to contribute troops, or funds. Elias, loath to bleed his people for distant battles, negotiated skillfully, a modest contingent under Prussian command, paid for by silver from the mines. Yet danger came closer to home in the autumn of 1793. A French émigré nobleman, the Comte de Florac, sought refuge at Ehrenberg, claiming kinship through Charlotte's Habsburg ties. He arrived with a small retinue, tales of narrow escape, and, unbeknownst to the court, a desperate gambling debt to Saxon creditors. Within weeks, de Florac began probing. Casual questions about the prince's childhood, compliments on portraits of Princess Eleanor that still hung in obscure galleries, hints that he had heard fascinating rumours in Dresden salons. Charlotte recognised the pattern immediately. At a hunting party, she manoeuvred the Comte into a private conversation. "You seek something, monsieur," she said coolly in French. "Speak plainly, or leave our hospitality." Cornered, de Florac confessed. Saxon agents had promised to cancel his debts if he could obtain any remaining proof of the old deception. Letters, diaries, even a lock of childhood hair preserved as a girl's. He had been instructed to befriend the family, gain access to private apartments. Charlotte did not rage. Instead, she smiled sweetly and excused herself. That night, de Florac was arrested in his chambers, his belongings searched. Nothing incriminating was found. He was too clever for that. But Elias had him escorted to the border with a polite note regretting incompatible temperaments. The incident served as a stark reminder. The secret, though buried deep, still held value for those who would weaponize it. As the century drew toward its close, Elias and Charlotte stood on the threshold of a new era, one where crowns themselves might topple. As the 1790s wore on, the storm clouds of revolution gathered ever darker over Europe. News from France grew more horrifying with each courier. King Louis VI and Queen Marie Antoinette dragged to the guillotine in 1793. The reign of terror devouring nobles and commoners alike. Radical armies sweeping across the Rhine. In German lands, fear spread like plague. Princes strengthened garrisons, censored pamphlets, and watched their subjects with wary eyes. Wallenstein, small and prosperous, felt the winds keenly. Elias, now in his 50s, hair silvered but posture still erect, walked a delicate line. He sympathised with Enlightenment ideals, had he not eased serfdom and opened schools, yet recoiled from the bloodshed. Charlotte, ever the Englishwoman, followed events in Paris with mounting dread. Marie Antoinette had been her distant cousin by marriage, and letters from émigré friends painted vivid pictures of horror. In 1795, young Friedrich Wilhelm, Fritz to the family, turned 29 and was formally invested as co-ruler, a precaution against the uncertain times. Tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with Charlotte's green eyes, he had married wisely 3 years earlier. Princess Louise of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a gentle, intelligent woman whose calm presence steadied the court. Their first child, a daughter named Eleanor after the old disguise, a private family joke, was born in 1794. Elias took satisfaction in watching his son prepare for rule. Fritz had been raised with full knowledge of the family secret, told on his 16th birthday in the chapel vault, surrounded by the iron chest that held the last childhood relics. A tiny lace cap, a lock of golden hair, a miniature portrait of Princess Eleanor painted when he, Elias, was 10. Fritz had listened gravely, then embraced his father. "Your courage bought our future," he said simply. The secret bound them closer. Yet as France's revolutionary armies, now reorganised under brilliant young generals, pushed deeper into Germany, neutrality became impossible. In 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte's stunning victories in Italy sent shockwaves through every court. Austria reeled, Prussia wavered, and smaller states were forced to choose sides. That autumn, an ultimatum arrived from Vienna. Joseph Thess was dead, succeeded by his brother Leopold and then Francis II. The new emperor demanded Wallenstein contribute a full regiment to the imperial forces fighting France, plus a substantial loan from the silver mines. Refusal would brand them Jacobin sympathisers. Elias convened his council in the Great Hall. Charlotte, now grandmother to little Eleanor, sat at his right, Fritz and Louise opposite. Debate raged. Send the troops and bleed the treasury, or resist and risk invasion by one side or the other? Charlotte spoke last. "We have survived by bending, never breaking. Contribute, but on our terms. The regiment under Fritz's command, stationed defensively on our own borders, and extract guarantees. No imperial garrisons here, no forced recruitment." The compromise was accepted. Fritz led the Wallenstein contingent south, distinguishing himself at minor engagements along the Rhine without ever facing the full fury of Napoleon's onslaught. The loan was paid in silver ingots, grudgingly acknowledged in Vienna. Peace, of a sort, returned with the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797, but everyone knew it was temporary. Napoleon crowned himself first consul, then emperor, and reshaped Europe like clay. In 1806, the Holy Roman Empire itself dissolved, Francis II becoming merely Emperor of Austria. The patchwork of German states was swept away in the Confederation of the Rhine, Napoleon's puppet alliance. Wallenstein, too small to stand alone, was absorbed into the new order. Elias was granted the title Grand Duke by Napoleon's decree, a hollow elevation that stripped ancient privileges while demanding loyalty. French officers quartered in the capital requisitioned grain and eyed the silver mines greedily. Elias swallowed the humiliation. "We endure," he told Charlotte privately, "as I once endured gowns and curls. Thrones rise and fall, our house will outlast them." Charlotte, frail now after a winter illness, clasped his hand. "We have seen empires crumble. Let them take titles. We keep our name, our children, our truth." In the spring of 1809, as Napoleon marched toward Vienna once more, Elias, 67 and weary, suffered a stroke while reviewing troops. He lingered for weeks, conscious but paralysed on one side. Charlotte rarely left his bedside, reading to him from English newspapers or the family letters. Fritz ruled in his stead, deftly navigating French demands while quietly aiding Austrian partisans. On a warm June evening, as cannon fire echoed distantly from the Battle of Wagram, Elias called his family to him. Fritz, Louise, the grandchildren, all gathered in the bedchamber hung with tapestries of old victories. He spoke haltingly, voice weak but clear. "The secret that began all this. Bury it with me. No more fear. Live openly, as you are." Charlotte wept quietly. "It is already buried, my love. The world has greater monsters now than old rumours." Elias died 3 days later, as news arrived of Napoleon's Pyrrhic victory at Wagram. The castle flags flew at half-mast. The people mourned a ruler who had guided them through deception, danger, and decades of change with steady hand. His funeral was grand yet restrained. No French officers dared intrude. In the crypt, beside Dr. von Stahl and the old midwives long gone, Elias was laid to rest. The iron chest was placed in his tomb, sealed forever. Charlotte survived him by 5 years, watching Napoleon's empire rise and crack. In 1815, as the Congress of Vienna redrew Europe yet again, she sat in the castle gardens with Fritz, now Grand Duke, and little Eleanor on her knee. "Do you know," she said softly, "your grandfather was once called Princess Eleanor?" The child giggled, thinking it a fairy tale. Fritz smiled, understanding. Charlotte died peacefully that winter, buried beside Elias. The secret went with her, not destroyed, but transformed. It became family legend, whispered to each heir on their 16th birthday, a reminder that identity is not always what birth decrees, and that courage can rewrite destiny. Wallenstein endured through the 19th century, eventually absorbed into a united Germany, its grand dukes fading into history. Schloss Ehrenberg still stands, its portraits gazing serenely, a delicate princess who became a wise prince, an English bride who fought with wit and love, and the children who never needed to hide. And in the crypt, behind stone and silence, the iron chest rests, its contents untouched, its story complete. The story of Prince Elias and Princess Charlotte did not vanish with the unification of Germany in 1871. Though the grand ducal throne was relinquished, and Wallenstein became merely a historic region within the new German Empire, the family endured, stripped of ruling power, yet retaining vast estates, the silver mines, now modernized corporations, and Schloss Ehrenberg as their ancestral seat. The descendants adapted quietly, serving as officers in the Kaiser's army, patronizing the arts in Berlin and Munich, marrying into Prussian and Bavarian nobility. The secret, once a matter of life and death, became a closely guarded family legend, shared only on coming of age, a rite of passage that reminded each generation of resilience forged in deception. In the turbulent 20th century, the family navigated the storms with the same caution their ancestors had mastered. During the First World War, young Prince Friedrich, great-grandson of Elias and Charlotte, fought on the Western Front, earning the Iron Cross before falling at Verdun in 1916. His sister, Princess Eleanor, named deliberately after the old disguise, worked as a nurse in Berlin hospitals, tending wounded soldiers while quietly aiding Jewish friends as whispers of anti-Semitism grew. The rise of the Nazis in 1933 tested the family as never before. The head of the house, Karl August, openly despised the regime. His English blood through Charlotte's line and liberal upbringing made National Socialism abhorrent. Yet opposition was dangerous. When pressed to join the party or display swastikas at the castle, Karl August complied minimally, flying the old Wallenstein banner alongside the hated flag. Privately, he sheltered dissidents in remote hunting lodges and funneled money to resistance networks. In 1944, after the July plot against Hitler failed, Gestapo agents descended on Ehrenberg searching for connections. Rumours falsely linked the family to the conspirators through distant cousins. The castle was ransacked, archives torn apart. In the crypt, officers pried at the sealed tomb of Elias, sensing hidden compartments, but the iron chest, embedded in stone and forgotten by all but the family, remained undisturbed. Karl August's wife, Sophie, faced interrogation in Berlin, enduring weeks of threats before being released for lack of evidence. The war ended in flames. As Soviet armies advanced in 1945, the family fled west with only what cars could carry. Portraits of Elias and Charlotte among the few treasures saved. Schloss Ehrenberg fell into the Soviet zone, later East Germany, its halls repurposed as a state museum glorifying workers while quietly decaying. Exiled to Bavaria, the family rebuilt modestly. The mines had been nationalized, fortunes scattered, but pride remained. In the post-war years, they spoke little of the past, blending into West German society as cultured aristocrats with a tragic history. It was not until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 that the castle returned to them. With German reunification, the family, now led by an elderly Princess Maria, Karl August's daughter, reclaimed Ehrenberg through lengthy legal battles. The once grand palace was a ruin. Tapestries moth-eaten, roofs collapsed, the crypt flooded. Restoration began slowly, funded by donations, European grants, and the sale of minor artworks. In 1995, during renovations, workers uncovered something extraordinary. Behind a false panel in the chapel, exactly where Elias had hidden the iron chest before his death, lay a sealed leather portfolio, untouched since 1809. Inside were letters, Charlotte's private journal from the 1760s, Elias's own handwritten memoir dictated in his final illness, and the last childhood relics, a tiny embroidered dress, a curl of golden hair, and a miniature portrait labelled Princess Eleanor, aged 8. The discovery made headlines across Europe. Historians authenticated the documents, the handwriting matched known samples, the paper and ink consistent with the era. For the first time, the full story emerged, not as scandal, but as a poignant tale of survival. Elias described the terror of his childhood disguise, the midnight lessons, the moment of revelation. Charlotte wrote movingly of their secret marriage, the ride to Prague, the burning of proofs in cathedral flames. Scholars debated, was this the real Chevalier d'Eon inspiration? A parallel case of gender concealment for political ends. Museums begged for exhibitions. The family, now headed by Maria's grandson Alexander, born in the 1960s and raised on whispered legends, chose careful disclosure. They donated copies to archives while retaining originals, opening a small permanent exhibit in the restored castle. The Prince, who was once a princess. A true story of 18th century Europe. Today, Schloss Ehrenberg welcomes visitors year-round. Tourists walk the halls where Elias cast off his gowns, stand in the chapel where he and Charlotte married in secret, descend to the crypt where the iron chest, now displayed in a glass case, rests as silent witness. The portrait of young Princess Eleanor hangs beside one of Prince Elias in full regalia, the transformation stark yet strangely seamless. And in the castle library, open to researchers, Charlotte's final journal entry is often quoted, "We lived a lie to preserve a truth, that love and courage matter more than any crown. May those who come after us never need such deception, but if they do, may they find the strength we somehow found." The shocking royal secret once buried beneath centuries of silence now stands revealed, not as shame, but as one of the most extraordinary tales of identity, loyalty and resilience in European history. The revelation in 1995 did not merely reopen a dusty chapter of history. It ignited a global fascination that rippled far beyond the quiet hills of Werenstein. Newspapers from London to New York splashed headlines. The princess who was a prince, 18th century royal gender swap confirmed. Television documentaries followed. BBC, PBS, and even a glossy Netflix-style series produced in Germany, dramatising the secret marriage, the midnight ride to Prague, the burning of letters in cathedral shadows. Actors with striking cheekbones portrayed young Elias, while historians debated the implications on panels lit by studio lights. For the family, now scattered across Germany, England and Canada, the exposure was bittersweet. Prince Alexander von Warenstein, the current head of the house, a soft-spoken architect in his 50s living in Munich, found himself thrust into interviews. He spoke carefully, emphasizing his ancestors' courage rather than sensationalism. Elias and Charlotte did not choose deception lightly, he told the BBC. It was survival in an age when succession meant everything, and mercy was rare. Scholars pounced. Universities hosted symposia on gender, power and identity in early modern Europe. Comparisons abounded. To the Chevalier d'Eon, the French diplomat who lived as both man and woman, to Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated and dressed in male attire, even to modern discussions of gender fluidity. Some argued Elias's story was an early case of transgender experience forced by politics. Others insisted it was purely pragmatic, a dynastic sleight of hand. The family declined to take sides, content that the truth, complex, human, was finally free. Tourism transformed Schloss Ehrenberg. Once a sleepy museum, it now drew hundreds of thousands annually. Visitors lingered longest in the small exhibit room dedicated to the secret, the iron chest under glass, Charlotte's journal open to her eloquent entry on love and courage, the twin portraits of Princess Eleanor and Prince Elias hanging side by side. Audio guides narrated in multiple languages, with actors voicing excerpts from the memoir. In summer, the gardens hosted historical reenactments, carefully respectful of the secret wedding, with couples from around the world renewing vows in the same chapel. Yet not all reactions were celebratory. Conservative corners of the internet bristled, calling it woke revisionism or questioning authenticity. Conspiracy theorists claim the documents were modern forgeries planted to normalize gender issues. Alexander responded with quiet dignity, inviting skeptics to examine the originals under supervision. Carbon dating, ink analysis, and handwriting expertise silenced most doubters. In 2005, on the 40th anniversary of Elias and Charlotte's public wedding, the family hosted a grand commemoration. Descendants gathered from across continents, great-great-grandchildren who bore Charlotte's auburn hair or Elias's sharp blue eyes. A new portrait was unveiled in the Great Hall, a composite painting showing Elias in his prince's uniform with Charlotte at his side, but with a subtle overlay, the faint silhouette of a young girl in lace, symbolising the dual life that forged their strength. The 21st century brought quieter honours. In 2015, a small plaza in the nearby town was renamed Elias und Charlotte Platz, with a bronze statue of the couple standing back to back, Elias facing forward as Prince, Charlotte turning slightly to shield the shadowy figure of the hidden child behind them. School children learned a sanitized version in local history classes, a tale of cleverness and love triumphing over rigid tradition. Alexander, now in his 70s, lives part-time in the restored east wing of the castle. He walks the corridors his ancestors paced in fear and triumph, tending the gardens Charlotte introduced centuries ago. On quiet evenings he sits in the library, reading the original journal by lamplight, marvelling at the journey from whispered crisis to celebrated legacy. The shocking royal secret that once threatened to topple a dynasty has become its enduring gift to the world. Proof that history is rarely as simple as portraits suggest, that identity can be both burden and salvation, and that love, fierce, defiant, enduring, can rewrite even the strictest scripts of power. And so the story of the princess who was actually a prince lives on, not in shadows but in sunlight, a testament to human resilience, the fluidity of truth, and the quiet courage it sometimes takes to simply be who you are.